Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Fire Up. And I am really fired up tonight, and I'll have a great crew. And more importantly, I'm pleased to be rejoined by Kent Sterling. But before I go to Kent, just let you know who the crew is. Smoking Jeremy, welcome back.
Glad to be here. Let's talk some football.
Oh, we're going to do exactly that, all right. And George Eichhorn, welcome back.
Good to be here, Scott, and great to be joined by Kent tonight, too.
And Kent Sterling, okay. Yeah, welcome back. I've had you before. I've been wanting to get you back on. Timing couldn't have been better. And I'll let Kent know that he definitely has an open invitation to come on anytime he wants to. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate it.
So, Kent, before we go into some of the topics here, why don't you give everybody an overview of who you are, what you do, and that sort of stuff.
I'm a native Chicagoan, moved to Indianapolis a while back, and been in radio basically my whole life. More as much social media now as radio. You've got to kind of evolve with the technology, and the technology brings us here. And people still use radio, and radio's important. But this is kind of where you can communicate with people a little bit more easily and have a lot of fun. So this is sort of where I am. And I've run sports radio stations and do a podcast with a guy named Dan Dockich, who's kind of a college basketball expert. And then I do a couple myself on my YouTube channel and enjoy that. We talk about Indianapolis Colts football, Indiana Hoosiers basketball principally, because that's what people in Indianapolis really care about and in Indiana. So that's the focus.
So, Kent, tell me, how long have you been in sports media for?
We launched 1070 The Fan for MS Communications back in 2008. Prior to that, it was news talk principally, and worked in the sports department at WGN in Chicago and WMAQ in Chicago with guys like Chuck Swirsky and Mike Greenberg, and had a great time back there. So it's been a fun ride, and continues to be.
Well, about 20, 30 years or so?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Chuck Swirsky from our days in Detroit. I caught up with him in San Antonio, actually, when he was with the Raptors. What a super nice guy. He really, really is. So, you won't find a much more classier individuals than that. So, George and I, we obviously know Chuck. I mean,
yeah, definitely. WJR radio used to be on in Detroit. Yep.
Yeah,
Chuck's a good guy.
Yeah, it really, really, really is cool. So, folks, let me give you an overview of what we're going to be talking tonight, and then I'll give you some other information. We'll talk about the Indianapolis Colts, the Detroit Lions, and then some. So, we'll go with the flow. Hope you can stay with us for the entire broadcast. I know you'll definitely be educated, informed. We do the best that we can to make sure we come up with timely topics, whether they're trending or not, and try to provide the best possible guests that we can. And Kent's just a guy that, once again, I've known for a while, and any opportunity I get to bring him on, I'm really glad that he is able to do that. So with that said, I should point out the audio version of Fire Up can be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. So if you want to listen to it, that's the way to do it. Please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube, South Florida Tribune. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers. Please also comment, like, and share the broadcast. Want to be a guest? No problem. Send topic ideas to South Florida Tribune at gmail.com. Or if you want to do it to my Twitter account, you can do so at Tribune South. Okay. And if you want to advertise, call 954-304-4941. We are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. With that said, let's focus on the task at hand. So let me ask you, Kent, okay, what are your assessments on the Indianapolis head coaching situation? I know you had Jeff Saturday for a while. That didn't work out. Now Shanesteichen is in, and he was a former offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's talk about Jeff Saturday for a moment first. I know he walked into a very awkward situation from ESPN into the head coaching thing, but what do you think about Jeff Saturday?
I think he's a wonderful human being. I thought he was ill prepared for the position. We hired him into media back when he was a Colt. He used to do a weekly call-in for us. And the first time we met him, I was like, that's the guy. Like, that is just a very confident communicator and a guy who knows himself really well. And those guys tend to do really well in radio. And so I was a big advocate for him in terms of media. As a coach, you got to have a little bit more heft behind you than 3 seasons as your son's high school coach and having played in the NFL. You know, there are guys who coach for a long time and build the resume necessary to be able to be successful in the NFL. And Jeff just didn't have it. What he did have was trust of the owner. Jimirsay trusted him. And so you could extrapolate from that he didn't feel like he could trust probably anybody else in the building on the football side. And that obviously that displaced Frankreich and meant trouble for Chris Ballard, although Chris Ballard has kind of found his way through it. But Jeff was just kind of ill prepared and I think was a guy who was sort of brought in to right the ship. There was a complete breach of trust somehow or another between Frankreich and Jeffsaturday, or Frankreich and Jimirsay, and as a result, Saturday was brought in. But bringing in Shanesteichen, we don't know. I mean, who knows whether a guy can coach until he coaches? He's undefeated, so he's walking the halls like, he's a really smart guy. Once you start losing games a little bit, we find out how you deal with adversity. And that's what we're kind of waiting for with Steichen. Up to this point, he's aces, but again, he hadn't lost a game.
Well, bear in mind, I definitely believe they brought him in because he's an offensive mind. And that'll lead me to my next question. But before I do that, Jeremy or George, anything you want to add to about what we just talked about?
I just think it was such a gamble. I mean, it was even it was such a stretch with Saturday. Okay, it reminds me of Mattmillen and how Mattmillen was made president of the Detroit Lions and general manager, running the show. As we know, that ended up as a disaster.
The decade of despair.
I understand with Saturday being good friends with Irsay and has his ear. I can understand all that. But you're right, Kent. He was put in a very tough situation with trying to salvage what he could of the 2022 season. What do you think, Smoke Jeremy?
Oh, please never mention the decade of despair under Millen again. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
That being said, because think about it, almost every single coach we had, it was the M&M show.
Yep.
Wasn't it Miller and Morningweg, Miller and Mariucci, Millen and Marinelli and Mayhew? It's a batch of M&Ms I never want to see again. But that being said, the Colts have a semi-good situation because they do have a good O-line. They have a decent D-line. They do have – the only thing they're really missing is a quarterback and the weapons for him to throw to.
Yeah, that's all.
I mean, no, seriously, that's where you guys are at. That's where you've been at since Luck retired. And every year you see every sports writer in Indianapolis because Andrew Luck shows up at the facility. Is he coming back?
Yeah, right. That's funny. Well, I will say one thing about the M&M. My dad's M&M, so not all M&Ms are bad. I think the candy's good, the M&Ms, and my dad's good. The Lions M&Ms, not so much.
Not so good. No.
All right, so let's go here. Ken, any ideas where the Colts are headed for a QB in the draft? I've heard a lot of names.
This is the first time we've been down this road with Chris Ballard. Chris Ballard's as likely to trade out of the first round as he is to stay in it. He's 3 of 6 in using his first round draft picks on guys instead of his trade bait. So we're not really sure what he's going to do at 4. Previously, I think the Colts were at 3. They traded down to 6. And that's when they drafted Quentin Nelson. It wouldn't surprise me. Chris Ballard, he says 2 things, and he says it a lot. He says, I love them picks, and he says, I build from the inside out. And so it wouldn't, like, if he traded back to 7 and drafted Jalen Carter, it wouldn't surprise me. I think Jimirsay might fire him that hour, but because you need a quarterback. I mean, right. Jeremy, you're exactly right. I mean, the Colts, they're okay on the interior, but they have no weapons. They have no quarterback. They have literally 2 cornerbacks who can play, and one of them's a slot corner. The other one's Isaiah Rodgers, and they don't have a quarterback opposite Isaiah Rodgers. So in the second round, they're going to have to address that if they don't in the first. But they need weapons, they need a quarterback, and they need guys not just to stop the opposition's weapons on the outside. They need edge guys who can knock down the opposing quarterback. Those are the 4 most important positions on the field, and the Colts don't have any of them covered, and that's a problem.
That is a problem. That means you got to get them from somewhere. I agree. I mean, I would keep it. I would draft a quarterback. What about the rumors about Lamarjackson? Nothing,
I think that'd be terrible. It's going to cost you all kinds of draft equity. It would cost just to issue him the offer sheet. And I know we're talking about a trade, but the offer would cost the Colts this year's first, which is the 4th overall, next year's first, and then whatever it costs you in terms of the contract.
Right.
And that's too much.
Yeah.
So if you're going to, I think, even if you're going to trade the 4th overall pick and then you're going to pay him, like, why aren't the Ravens paying him at the level that another team would? Why would the Colts give up the 4th overall pick for the right to pay Lamarjackson the kind of money that the Ravens won't pay him? Why would you make that decision? I saw a mock draft today where they've got the 4th overall pick going to the Ravens and them taking cjstroud, Lamarjackson coming to the Colts. And you would assume that Lamarjackson's going to get paid, I don't know, it's not going to be Jalen Hurts money. It's not going to be $255 over 5 years, but it's going to be $200 over 5 years in all likelihood, with either all of it or the vast majority guaranteed. Why would you pay a guy who plays 11 games a year?
That's it.
And you could get cjstroud, who it would seem if this trade went through, the Ravens covet on his rookie deal. It doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the only thing I'll say about the whole thing is, number one, you nailed it right there, Ken. Lack of availability has killed Lamarjackson. And when you've only played one out of about a possible 12 games the last 2 years in the month of November and December, sorry, that just doesn't get it done. It really doesn't get it done. And I don't care what anybody says. I've always been a firm believer that, to me, you have got to go out there. The Colts, I look at going from Manning to Luck, and now they've had bad luck after luck, going through everybody from Phillip Rivers to whoever, Carson Wentz. So, they got to button it up. They got a quarterback in the worst way. Let me just mention a comment by Ralph Williams, okay? Take it for whatever. Hello, guys. Colts have tough sledding, and the Lions could get better. Yeah, I guess, Ralph, that's definitely a safe assessment for sure. So with that said, okay, Kent, give me your assessments on where the top quarterbacks are going to go.
I think Bryce Young goes first to the Panthers, if not Stroud. And then I think that the Texans are going to take the other. I think either the Cardinals trade out of 3, or they take the edge out of Alabama, Williams. And then you've got the Colts. And the Colts, if somebody else drops, the Colts are going to have their choice of 2. They might trade back. They might take Richardson. I don't think they're going to take Levis. Willlevis just strikes me as a guy. And I watched Levis. I wanted to like Levis as he played for Kentucky. And they kept talking about Levis this, Levis that, and Kentucky looked good. So I watched, and to me, he wasn't impressive up here. He made bad decisions. He made bad reads. He threw off his back foot. He didn't have kind of that foundation to be able to make throws every single time. He didn't repeat it. He wasn't consistent in his motion. And he made, like I said, bad reads. And so I don't think he projects as a high-level starter in the NFL. And I know some people, they disagree with that, and that's what makes that's what makes the NFL fun. Anthony Richardson is a really interesting dude in that he's got all the athletic tools and beyond maybe anybody in the history of the game. There's nobody in the history of the NFL that plays the quarterback position that can throw the way he does, has the build of a linebacker, the balance of a running back, and the speed of a wide receiver. This guy has every physical attribute necessary to be a great success. He's only had 13 starts. You don't know whether he's going to be able to develop the functional capacity to make very, very quick decisions and be kind of that quarterback who feels in the pocket like Bryce Young does. If you put Bryce Young's brain in Anthony Richardson's head, you'd have the best quarterback in the history of the universe. And you've got to see if Shanesteichen can be the guy who develops that in Anthony Richardson. That's why they hired him.
Yeah, that's pretty good. All right, George, what do you want to add to this?
No, I know Richardson has so many tools, but you're right. He does not have much experience. I mean, college career is so very short, and you wonder how quickly he can adapt to the NFL. I mean, if you put him in a situation where he sits behind a good, solid starter like a Goff or somebody like that for a year or two, that's different. But when you're putting him right into the fire as quickly as you can because you're, quasi-desperate, but you want to win, obviously you want to win, then it's a tougher situation for Richardson. I agree with that, Kent. Jeremy?
And that would be a really, really interesting partner for the people keep talking about the Raiders as a trade partner for the Colts, but I think the Lions are really interesting at 6-2 because of exactly what you said. Jared Goff last year was a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. And to have him as a guy for 2 years, let's say, kind of help, as Anthony Richardson figures some stuff out, it wouldn't surprise me to see the Lions get a little bit greedy and move up a little bit.
There are several sportscasters in Detroit that hope that happens, but the majority of them are basically saying don't draft a quarterback. I don't know.
Well, before I turn over to Jeremy, though, I do want to point out that Anthony Richardson played for an average Florida Gators team too. So I think you have to, the Gators were hovering around mediocrity. Billy Napier has yet to put a stamp on the program yet. So, so again, like you said, Kent, if he's in the right situation, let him hold a clipboard. I've always felt, I don't know about you, a quarterback should hold a clipboard for 1 or 2 years regardless. Unfortunately, welcome to the world of impatience, okay? And it just doesn't happen. But, I would be hard-pressed to think the Lions would go quarterback route, but I'll let Jeremy comment on this.
I personally feel that going a quarterback this early, when there's questions outside of the top two, is not a very smart move. Right. I think it would be smarter to wait till the end of day 2 or maybe even in day 3 to get a developmental quarterback because you do have Jared Goff for 2 years. We just re-signed Sudfeld because he did a great job holding the clipboard, but I don't trust him to take the field any more than I trusted Malik Willis in the last year's draft.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So Jeremy, do you have any idea where you think a lot of the top QBs should be going?
From what I'm hearing through the circles I've been through, I think it's Stroud 1, Young 2. The teams that may trade up to 3 that want a quarterback is either Washington or Tennessee. And if that happens, you can see Anthony Richardson going there. And I was like, it'd be hilarious if the Titans did that because they get Malik Willis 2.0.
Interesting. Okay, Ken, let's go back to the Colts for a moment. Then we're going to switch it over to the Lions. What are the other major areas that the Colts need?
They need an edge. They absolutely have to draft a cornerback. They have no choice but to do that. As they sit right now at wide receiver, they've got 3. They've got Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce, and then they picked up as a free agent Isaiah McKenzie from the Bills, who's a slot guy, but he's on a minimum contract, and nobody really wanted him. And there's got to be a reason for that. I mean, what Chris Ballard always does, like the Dallas Cowboys, they haven't won a championship in forever.
Yeah.
They shop at Saks or at Nordstrom. And Chris Ballard likes shopping at garage sales. He's going to flea markets and picking guys up and hoping that somehow they can lift these guys from, on a scale of 1 to 10, from a 5 to a 6. You don't win championships with those guys. You win championships with 8.5s and 9s. And the Colts never go out of their way to get one of those guys, to the point where when Ballard gets assailed for this, he always brings up DeForest Buckner. And he says, hey, you guys say I don't take risks. Well, what about DeForest Buckner? That was a trade he made 3 years ago to go get DeForest Buckner, a defensive tackle, who he probably overpaid a little bit and gave up the 13th overall pick for. Right. And that was a bit of a risk, and good for him. But that's one risk in 6 years that he's hanging his hat on. You don't win championships like that. You do what the Eagles did. Not a championship team, but they made the Super Bowl. They went out and traded for A.J. Brown. And the Chiefs, when they lost weapons like Tyreek Hill goes to Miami, what do? They go out and sign guys. They go out and draft guys. They draft Sky Moore, and they had enough weaponry that they really didn't even need to use Sky Moore, and they could develop him for a year until somebody else left, and now he's going to step in. You know, these guys, Andy Reid and, you know, those guys, they're playing three-dimensional chess, and I feel like Chris Ballard's trying to, you know, get his head around checkers. And that's not a positive thing. And so hopefully he can figure out in this draft how to parlay the assets that he's got into weapons that can help this team win, because there is a scarcity of talent at the most highly leveraged positions on the field.
Boy, I tell you what, I've seen some people come on this show, but you talk about some of your one-liners being rapid fire. No wonder you're pretty darn good on the air. First of all, let me go ahead mention that I've never heard 3D chess mentioned on this show before until now. Okay. And now I've never heard checkers mentioned. And if you think I've ever heard garage sales and flea markets mentioned on a sports show, you talk about a grand slam home run of analogies, Mr. Sterling. I mean, that was pretty darn cool, man.
They never stop. Whether they make sense or not, you just keep going. You know,
I know, but come on. I'm giving you a compliment. Things. Well, then again, you got to remember, we got 3 broadcasters, and we got Smokin', who's coming a long way in his broadcasting career, and he's surrounded by a bunch of old geezers, and yet he's the new guy on the block. So I hope you go out there smoking and absorb this show and listen to it, because you got 3 pros showing you the way. Not that you aren't, but all seriously, all kidding aside, I mean, those are pretty strong analogies, and I really like them. So with that said, you really give about the most interesting description of a Chris Ballard. But before I go to him anymore, what are your thoughts about Jonathan Taylor? Is this guy going to bounce back?
I hope so. If not, I don't know what you do. That high ankle really kind of unraveled the entire offense. You know, They were so highly wrapped up into what Jonathan Taylor was going to be able to do for him. And rightly so. I mean, 1,800 plus yards the year before, just running, and another 400 receiving. He was a guy you could count on. He took it to the house a bunch. And you needed something dynamic within that offense. And Jonathan Taylor was the only port in the storm. You put Matt Ryan on the field with Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce, the tight ends that the Colts have, and backup running backs, and it's not going to be real pretty. And then if you do the same thing with Sam Ehlinger as a quarterback and Nick Foles as a quarterback, it's really not going to be very pretty. And it wasn't. You wind up being 4-12-1, and you're drafting 4th, and you got to fix it. You have to fix it, or you got to blow it up. And I hope they don't blow it up, because I think that Chris Ballard, if he just got out of his own way, he'd be fine. You know, if he would just stop this nonsensical dogma that you must build from the inside out, where everybody in football is building from the outside in. You know, the Bengals are really, really good because they got Chase and they got Higgins and they got Boyd and they got Burrow. You know, that's a good unit. The Rams, when they won the championship, they were good. The outside in. Bucks, outside in. you keep seeing again and again and again, Eagles, right? Chiefs, over and over again. I mean, it's mind numbing that Chris Ballard continues to defend this mountain that nobody else claims is theirs. And he does it to the death. He says that that's going to be on his gravestone, is built from the inside out. It just doesn't work. I think the way he goes about his business in evaluation is really, really good. And he dots all the I's and crosses all the T's. But his basic premise is so flawed that the Colts wind up foundering.
All right, well, now you really led me to a great follow-up here. First of all, okay, well, the Lions build inside out when you have Penei Sewell, but he's that rare bird where you have a good offensive lineman who's a generational guy. You have to take him anyways. But I would say for the most part, you're on target, that you want to have playmakers and good quarterbacks, although we all know quarterbacks are a crapshoot. But everything you described to me about Chris Ballard, would you say, Kent, that Chris is really surely on the hot seat?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The one thing that Jimirsay demands as an owner is kind of the facade of hope. You've got to be able to present hope. That's what moves the tickets. And without hope, you got no chance. And if Ballard goes through this draft, and he's continued to do the same thing, didn't spend a lot in free agency, and if he goes through this draft and they come out the other end 3-14 or 4-13, 5-12, they're, you know what? Hoosiers are really trusting. Indiana people trust. And that's one of their great traits. But they're going to stop trusting in a big hurry if Chris Ballard doesn't get it done in this draft and provide a reason for hope in the future.
So with that said, what type of a record do the Colts have to have for Chris Ballard to be employed at this time next year?
See, I think this is interesting, and I think this is why Anthony Richardson, there's a shot he takes him at 4. Because people are going to understand that Anthony Richardson is a project that you've got to sit for a year. He's got to do kind of what Patrick Mahomes did behind Alex Smith, and that there is that example that helps play into this hopeful premise. If you've got Gardner Minshew as the starting quarterback for 17 games this coming year, as Anthony Richardson figures out how to play in the NFL, I think Chris Ballard keeps his job no matter what the record is. I think if they trade back and they try to win with bulk mediocrity rather than going out and getting a potential elite level somebody at some position, in this case Richardson at quarterback, I think then you've got problems, because you're showing an intractability for the dogma that hasn't worked for you previously. And that's a problem. But if you go out and get Richardson and you sit him on his ass and you go 3-14 and you say, hey, this guy has really developed. Shanesteichen has been working with him. Jim Bob Cooter, your guy from Detroit, for a few years. He's worked with him, and we're ready to unleash this beast in 2024. I think he can keep his job.
Great stuff. You guys want to add to it before we talk about a little the Detroit Lions, Jeremy?
I do want to talk about the building stuff that you talked about, because when you mention the Bengals, you forget they have been rebuilding ever since the exit of Andy Dalton, and they had already built from the inside out by the time they took Burrow and Chase. The first wide receiver they took was Higgins, and Boyd was actually a pickup from one of them was a rookie. The other one was a free agency pickup, if I remember right. I don't remember if it was Boyd was the free agency pickup or if it was Higgins. Higgins they drafted. Boyd they picked up for his second contract because the first team didn't keep him. But when you paired him up with Higgins and with Chase and Joe Burrow, that made one heck of a three-headed monster to go with for Joe, which is why he's had such great completion percentage. He's got guys that create separation without trying.
That's the key. And his offensive line has been garbage.
Yeah, he's been one of the most sacked quarterbacks over the last 3 seasons combined.
Yeah, and I think the Lions, I know you're going to get to this in a minute, Scott. I was intrigued, Kent, what you said about going after receivers. And I give the Lions credit. Golden Tate, Marvin Jones. The Lions have not been afraid to try to get, and of course, the great Calvin Johnson. I mean, that's that's a Hall of Famer right there. But I mean, over the years, at least the Lions haven't gone to that flea market like you described. And they have tried to get some name receivers there, especially when they were trying to support a fellow named Matthew Stafford. But now Detroit does have a good lineup, and that is something that Indiana, like you said, has been striving for. They need some marquee help there at wide receiver as well as the edge, like you mentioned.
Well, they have one good one. They just don't have anybody opposite them or in the middle is the problem. So every QB has got to struggle to try to get it to Pittman the whole time, and he's covered like a wet blanket.
Yeah.
All right, Ken, I got to ask you a funny question. Of all these things you've hit me with, checkers, 3D chess, garage sales, flea market, what should be your candid nickname? Should we call you Kent, Flea Market, Sterling, or Kent, Garage Sales, Sterling? Come on, Kent Sterling just seems so nice and clean.
It's funny. I've never had a nickname ever. Even in Spanish class where everybody had, this guy was Marco, this guy was Esteban.
Please don't tell me the next guy was Polo.
I was Kent. I have always been Kent. You can call me whatever you want, but I have always been Kent.
Or Chris Berman might call you Clark Kent Sterling. I don't know. I'm sorry, pal.
That's good.
When I get these lighthearted moments, and being in the business, you got to have them, Kent. You really do. I mean, I've been no shortage of nicknames, but is it about me? No.
Just don't call me my Spanish name, Jorge, or Jorge. Don't call me that.
When I was young as a kid, I got named Duke, and then Gus Panelidis named me Scoop, and then my ex-wife gave me the name Motor City Madmouth, which is probably more appropriate anyways. and now I spent the money to trademark it. We'll leave it at that. I just had no choice, Kent. You left me wide open. Hey, a little humor doesn't hurt anything, right, Kent?
Sure.
How many times have you been down that road? So, All right, let's do a little bit of Detroit Lions. So since we're all laughing anyways, that's what it's all about. So Lions trading Jeffokudah, and they're eating some of his salary to Atlanta for a 2023 fifth-round pick. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to go with Kent first, and I'll go around with everybody else. What are your thoughts about that transaction, Kent?
I don't know what happened to Okudah. I mean, he was the highest drafted cornerback in forever, and somehow he didn't work out, and I just kind of don't get it. I don't know what happened that he didn't work out to spend that kind of draft equity and what you get back. And I get it. You don't want to extend him into that fifth year and all of that, but to get a fifth rounder back, like what happened to this guy? Why did he fall apart?
He can't play zone. But anyways,
go ahead. Well, you know what? I'll transition over to you, Jeremy. Go ahead and let Kent know.
If you look at it, every game that he struggled was when he was playing zone defense. Aubrey Pleasant's defense was a man zone. You played man outside and zone in the middle. And during those first 7 games this season, he flourished when he finally was healthy. And you've seen him. He was blanketing guys. He held A.J. Brown to, 4 catches and under 40 yards. He held Justin Jefferson to 3 catches and 14 yards. After the firing of Aubrey Pleasant, Aaron Glenn's defense is more of a hybrid. It's just the opposite. The safeties play less zone and the corners play more zone. The problem is we had Amani Oruwariye, who was a great zone player and looked like he was better than Jeffokudah the last 2 seasons because of Okudah's injuries. But at the same time, once we went to man, he fell apart and he mentally broke down. I think that's what happened with AO and why we got rid of him. So moving on from Okudah is because he was part of that Quinn Trasha era. He was a 3rd-round pick. Granted, all the draft prognosticators, everybody on ESPN, the NFL Network, said he was the 3rd best player overall in the draft, ahead of Tua, ahead of Justin Herbert, ahead of Isaiah Simmons. I cry thinking of what it would have been like to have Isaiah Simmons instead of Jeffokudah, but that's another story. We got what we could. We were asking a 3rd, and that was probably the best offer we got. Why? Because he can't play zone. And luckily for him, he went to a team that plays a lot of man coverage and has a true number 1 in AJ Terrell already, which if you look at when Matt Patricia, or Patricia, whatever you want to call him, I call him Patricia for a reason. He ran that zone coverage. We had Desmond Trufant that we signed for our one, and he gets hurt at the same exact moment that Okudah gets hurt under Dan Campbell's first year. So he has to be thrown in playing zone when he was a press man coverage corner coming out of Ohio State, and he couldn't do it. He was put up against elite wide receivers. But if you look at his numbers versus the 2s and 3s, they were astronomically better than those 10 games he played the first season. Why? Because the inside played a man coverage.
There you go. You got a good football lesson from Mr. X's and O's, Kent. All right, George, where do you want to go?
I can't top that. I mean, Smoking Jeremy nailed it, really. And the fact that Okudah could not adapt, and there were some injuries there, obviously. But yeah, it's a black mark. It's a terrible waste of a first-round draft pick by Quinn and Patricia. I mean,
it should have been Isaiah Simmons. I'll say it till I die.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things. And obviously, we know Kent and Scott that every franchise goes through this, things that they regret. But the kid was so highly rated out of Ohio State. Ohio State's always has great guys in the secondary. That's all you got to do is ask the Michigan fans about that. After getting beat soundly so many times by those guys in the secondary.
You have to remember, the Michigan quarterbacks were so bad, they made them good.
Okay. I'll grant you a little bit of that too. But
Shea Patterson. That's all I got to say. Shea Patterson.
Yep. So yeah, I agree, Scott. And it was a bad move, but like Jeremy said, they got what they could for him.
Well, the amazing part about it is if the Lions didn't make this mistake, some other team probably would have too, because he was considered a top prospect anyways. And when you're dealing with injuries, I don't care what organization you're with, anytime you have injuries that derail your progress because you can't be on the field, as we talked about all the show, right, Kent? Then that's certainly going to be a bit of a problem, regardless whether the Lions would have made a mistake or any other particular franchise. That wouldn't have mattered. Unfortunately for Okudah, it didn't work out. And also, fortunate for the Lions that they were able to bolster that position during free agency, therefore making him expendable as well. So, but that said, I know a guy that you should know a little bit more about, Kent, because when I covered the Jacksonville Jaguars, you had to deal with Marvin Jones Jr. a couple of times a year, and who obviously re-signed with the Lions 1 year, $3 million. So what are your thoughts about what you think Marvin Jones Jr. is going to bring back to the Lions, knowing you had to face him with the Colts?
I always worry a guy like Marvin Jones, age 33, it's really hard to get continued productivity out of a wide receiver when they hit that kind of age. And you hope that they can milk one more year out of it. And you've seen Julio Jones couldn't do it. Andre Johnson couldn't do it.
Right.
You've seen guys hit that threshold and just sort of fall apart. When he was good, he was really, really, he wasn't an elite level wide receiver. He wasn't a Hall of Fame type guy, but he was at the highest end of competent, and so if the Lions can get one more year like that out of him, I think that balances that weaponry for the Lions at a level where, I mean, and you get a guy. The one thing I worry about with the Lions is you go get a guy like David Montgomery. David Montgomery, again, like high-end mediocre. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to go out and get a really good running back, but a high-end mediocre, you start stacking mediocrity and you wind up with a mediocre roster. So Marvin Jones, I think, is one of those guys that I hope he does well for the Lions. I root for the Lions. But it's kind of like they're taking flyers on guys where they're hoping to get a little bit more out of them than maybe they got to give.
I'll tell you why we picked up David Montgomery. Because the Chicago O-line has been trashed the last 4 years that he played there, and he managed to get at least 800 yards every year on the ground.
True.
Yeah, but you can't blame everything on the offensive line.
Oh, you could blame a lot of it.
And this is kind of the false argument that a lot of people, if we go back to quarterbacks, they'll say, well, you don't like Willlevis. He had a garbage offensive line. He was playing in a bad system. He was hurt. He didn't have good weapons. At some point, the responsibility for productivity becomes the owner's responsibility. And David Montgomery over the course, was it 4 years? Right. And it was always 800 yards, but it was 3 of those years, it was just over 800 yards.
And one was over 1,000.
Right. And so it's not him, Jonathan Taylor, and he's not Joe Mixon, and he's not that higher end guy. He's a capable guy, but he falls outside the top 10. And even with a good offensive line, I think you're still hoping for the best. You're still saying, oh, don't pay any attention to those numbers, because the guys, there are reasons for the numbers. And sometimes there are, Smoke and Jeremy, you could be right. But a lot of times the guy owns the numbers.
Let me tell you, before I turn over to George, you talk about Willlevis, and I forgot about it, but I'm going to mention it now. For some reason, I don't get too impressed with a guy that's a bodybuilder showing off his weight room in public. That just doesn't do it for me, Ken. It just doesn't.
That's Brady Quinn, isn't it? That's a Brady Quinn move.
Well, it seems like it to me.
Or Johnny Manziel.
Okay, if you're telling me that his accuracy is questioned, which I've heard from a lot of draft experts that there are, and now you're talking about a guy here who wants to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay, the only heavy quarterback I ever enjoyed was Jared Lorenzen. I mean, this guy was 270 pounds worth of fun and humility. That was different. The hefty lefty, is that what they call it, Ken? Yeah. I didn't mind that. That was a folk story. But
you tell me you didn't like Jamarcus Russell?
No comment. No, I'm not talking. Don't get me off track, because I have a lot of things to say about that. We don't have
Dante Culpepper as a Lion?
Yeah, but meanwhile, the Lions want to go ahead and try to. Who are they looking to bring on? Teddy Bridgewater? Let's leave it alone, Jeremy. I want to stay on my point, though, with Willlevis. Anybody that can go out there to me and want to go out there and say, hey, I got these things called muscles and they look awfully good. So what? Show me what you can do on the field. Nowadays, I don't care about, I know you have the combine over at Indianapolis. And have you covered many of those combines at all? I imagine right in your backyard, you probably have.
I used to, and they were really fun until everybody started coming. And once the media outnumbered the coaches, scouts, and players, it wound up that the media was just interviewing the media. And you had scrums with the athletes and the coaches were at a podium instead of like in 07, 08 back then, you'd just say, hey, okay, you want to come on over and talk? And coaches would come on over and talk. And it was really, really fun. Anymore, it's kind of a show instead of what it was, which was kind of just a laid back time to get to know each other and do some good interviews.
Well, the amazing part about the whole thing here with the combine is you think I'm going to go out there and give a guy a high grade because he's in shorts and a T-shirt. Let me tell you, I covered a couple of pro days recently, and then also I'm at spring practice. So I get more out of the pro days, Kent, than I do the actual combine, because at that particular point, it's a much different situation. It really is. And you see a little bit more contact, and these are more scripted and all that. So, but to me, I'm not impressed with Willlevis. We'll see how it turns out. I'm not going to tell you that one of the last Kentucky quarterbacks that was drafted high by the Cleveland Browns was a guy named Tim Couch. We all know how that worked out.
He was great.
Work out
for every team that played against the Browns.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
right.
yeah, no, I was just curious. I don't know, Ken. I'm just not impressed with guys that walk around. Don't get me wrong. It's okay to have a bodybuilder and be built well. But if you're putting that on social media, and a lot of the people that watch your body of work, not only in film, but what some of the other skills are, it'll be interesting to see where this guy winds up. And I agree with you again. Anthony Richardson, if the Colts are going to make a move, would be the guy I would take it for. So.
As far as Montgomery goes, I'm not going to side with you, Kent. I'm going to side with Jeremy. I think he's an improvement for Detroit. I think he is. As far as Marvin Jones goes, I agree with you, Kent. They got him for 1 year. They hope there's a lot of gas still in the tank there, and if he can work some magic with Goff, all the more power to Detroit. They got another weapon to use, but. No, I've always admired Montgomery in Chicago. I know his numbers aren't as terrific as a lot of running backs are, but I think the kid's got a good head on his shoulders, and he can help the Lions out in the rushing game.
Well, I'll say this about Marvin Jones before I segue over to the next topic. I could see Marvin Jones being the coach of the Detroit Lions down the road, especially if he likes a new culture, which does indeed segue to my next segment. And so, how much of an impact do you think that cornerback coach drebly will make on the secondary? Do you know anything about drebly at all, Kent?
Not really, but I always like guys like that. I like with the Colts. I'll take it back to the Colts for a minute. You mentioned Marvin Jones being a wide receivers coach. Potentially, Reggie Wayne's the wide receivers coach with the Colts. Mike Mitchell, former safety with the Colts and the Steelers, is the assistant safeties coach. Cato June's an assistant linebackers coach. When you've got the former players, they've got a gravitas that the current players kind of vibe with a little bit. And so I think drebly, who is outstanding at what he did and a great technician, I think he's one of those guys who's going to be able to get his message across to players, and that it's just a question of what the message is. But given the way he played, I mean, I can't imagine it would be anything but a positive.
All right, Jeremy.
Drebly, he was great for the Rams. He was also great for the Lions when he played for us. He was one of our best corners during those few years when we didn't have much that was good in that whole decade of despair, which I refuse to say that GM's name. That being said, I think he's going to do a great job. He's actually owned his own arena football league out there in the Maryland, New York, Massachusetts area. My brother actually played in that league, paid by drebly for the Delmira Tyrants while he was in the Navy, so that was kind of cool. They won the championship 2 years in a row, and it was actually called the Drebly League.
The Drebly League. I hope he has a successful career in Detroit. I mean, he had a successful career on the field, and the Lions, like you said, Kent, are doing the same thing. A lot of guys, former players. You got Campbell as the head coach and all these guys that have played. I think it's a good idea. I mean, I really do. I mean, you surround yourself with the best coaches you can, but it's also is an asset if you can pick coaches that have played at a high level, which obviously the NFL is a high level. So I'm all for him. I hope he succeeds as the secondary coach here in Detroit, and certainly he was very popular with the fans and still is.
Yeah, and that's where I was going with this too, George. I mean, he understands the culture, and anytime you talk, he's always had a good attitude about the Detroit Lions.
Very open to the media to talk to us, Scott. Exactly.
Yeah, so there's no question in my mind that drebly is definitely a Lion through and through, between even in lean times and not. Now, I know one topic that Kent Sterling's looking forward to talking to, and you know what I decided to do? We're doing all right with time. We're going to talk about Indiana basketball at the very end, all right? Because now, but what show would be without having you on, Kent, about what do you think of Dan Campbell?
I love Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell brings bubbles. You know what I mean? There's an effervescence to the guy. There's an energy, and I think that energy is really, really important. And you guys had a coach that we also had, and that's Jim Caldwell. Right. And Jim Caldwell, no bubbles, and I think over time that lack of effervescence really just kind of like the franchise sort of eases into oblivion, kind of. Jim Caldwell's a guy never blinked. Like, I would sit and talk to him and just keep babbling so I could keep staring into his eyes and see if he ever blinked. I never saw him blink. I don't know whether that means he's a great coach or a bad coach. Not a bad coach with the Lions. Good coach here for a year, mediocre coach the next, and a terrible coach the third and final year. But I like Campbell. I think that he's a guy who brings that level of energy. I got to believe that the fans vibe with it, that the players vibe with it. And I think that more importantly, I think that the Lions just seem to be a much more competent football team under Dan Campbell than I ever remember them being, going all the way back to like Wayne Fonts.
Oh boy, you really struck a chord there.
Oh.
But I love working with Wayne Fonts. I went to school with his son Mike, and Wayne was. If you ever went to his drafts, Wayne Fonts, we had a lot of fun over at the Pontiac Silverdome. So I'm with you there. Yeah, Dan Campbell to me, anytime a guy's going to go out there and do push-ups out on the field, isn't all that bad. I mean, now in Miami, they didn't know whether or not he was a great talker, but the Dolphins could have used him. I know he took over for uh, Philbin, I think Joe Philbin for on a temporary basis. But yeah, Dan Campbell is definitely a guy that, they play hard even when they got out to an atrocious start their first year. They battled until the end and then they got better. Even when things were, 1-6 or so, then they got it turned around. So there's no give up in that team. All right, Jeremy, we know obviously your kneecap biting channel was named after. You got to hear this story about why this guy has a channel revolving around Dan Campbell. So give it to him, Jeremy.
It was that first speech. Come on.
Yeah.
You knock us down, we're going to bite a kneecap. You knock us down again, we're going to take the other one off. I mean, you can't get excited about that as a fan. You're not a fan. The way he talked to the players, we watched it in the Hard Knock series this last offseason. He truly cares about them, and you can see it. And he motivates them to be better men than they were. I don't think Jamal Williams would have ever got that many touchdowns if they'd assigned him instead of Aaron Jones at Green Bay. I don't think he'd have had that many touchdowns there. You know why I think David Montgomery is going to succeed here in Detroit? Because our O-line ranked first in yards before running back contact. 4.3 yards.
Interesting.
You give a guy 4.3 yards to get going when he starts 5 yards behind the line, that means he's at 3/4 to top speed by the time he gets contacted.
Interesting stuff. All right, George, some observations about Dan Campbell.
Oh, the whole city's in love with him, Scott. I mean, obviously, he's the darling of the media. He's the darling of the team. He's the face of the franchise right now. He's a good guy. I remember they made him the honorary starter at the Detroit Grand Prix race on Belle Isle a year or so ago. And I mean, everybody just really admires the job he does. And he's just so down to earth. He's just a real guy. I mean, he's a real football man. He doesn't put any errors on. And, that was a good comparison. I wasn't happy when they got rid of Caldwell. They said they were going to improve the team. And they were 9-7, made the playoffs. But you brought up a good point, Kent. He was not lackadaisical, but middle of the road. I mean, laissez-faire. I mean, you weren't going to get any high fives. You weren't going to get rah-rah at all from Campbell. And that's what
you mean from Caldwell.
I mean, from Caldwell. I'm sorry. So Campbell was the answer. I mean, he really was. And Detroit made a good hire, Sheila Ford Hemp, whatever. And I think it was a really good hire. And the sky is the limit for this team and this franchise right now with him in charge.
Okay, now I just want to go to a couple of basketball questions because I have a Hoosier on here. I had no choice. And so, first of all, let's just talk about the state of Indiana men's basketball really quickly, okay? Mike Woodson is running the program. What are your thoughts about the job that Mike Woodson has done?
Well, through 2 years, they keep kind of kicking the can down the road a little bit farther. First year was the first time that they had made the NCAA tournament since 2016. This past year, they won a game in the bracket. They won the play-in game the year previous. This year, they won a game in the actual bracket. So they keep moving it, a little bit farther along. I think he did a nice job with Trayce Jackson-Davis, kind of brought him along as a leader on that team, imparted to him the need to be kind of an energetic leader, which is not necessarily Trayce Jackson-Davis's personality. So I think he's done a relatively good job. I think the recruiting is a little bit kind of scattershot. I don't think that necessarily Indiana's building a culture, and we get to see it in Indiana. You guys see it there too with Michigan, because I think Juwan Howard's a kind of akin to Mike Woodson in a lot of ways, actually. And then Matt Painter and Tom Izzo are kind of like-minded in this way, that they both recruit and coach to a culture. And so at Indiana, we look at Purdue and we say, why can't we have like tough guy basketball? Why can't we play hard every second of these 40-minute games? And like they do, they go out and recruit Indiana guys who are 3-star guys, and they win the Big Ten by 3 games. Indiana's got 4 and 5-star guys, and they don't play hard for 40 minutes. If you get 38, 36 minutes out of them, you feel pretty good, but they don't play hard all the time. And they wind up 3rd in the Big Ten. Why is that? You know, those are the questions being asked by Indiana fans about Purdue. I think probably in the same way that Michigan fans are looking at Michigan State and say, why can't we do this?
Right. And obviously we know the Woodson connection with Bob Knight probably factored into that hire too, didn't it?
It did. The job was offered first to Brad Stevens, and he was given kind of a blank contract, said, hey, fill in the number. You want to come here? And Brad's very, very happy in Boston. And so Woody came in and, you know, it didn't ask for the world, and it has been very happy to be there and, you know, works at it. And he's got an okay staff. And, you know, I think he's trying, but this is going to be a big year. This is the first time that he's going to have to do it with his own guys instead of Archie Miller's guys. And so we're going to find out what kind of a group, what kind of a culture Mike Woodson can go build. It's all about defense for Mike Woodson. And so we'll see what kind of defensive effort that they can make this year without Trace Jackson Davis being the rim protector, and without Race Thompson kind of being that bulky guy in the middle that keeps guys out.
Well, and how can I not ask you a question about Dusty May? I know the Hoosiers would be salivating if they could get Dusty May out of Boca Raton to be able to run that program, because I know that's where Dusty's roots lie with the Hoosiers, isn't it?
Yeah, Dusty's from Greene County, which is like a county over from Monroe County, which is where Bloomington is. Played high school basketball, was a manager under Bob Knight for Bob Knight's, I think, his final 4 years. He's got Todd Abernathy on his staff, who's a Carmel, Indiana guy who played high school basketball at Heritage Christian and then went to Ole Miss. And so we're really familiar with Dusty May and with Todd Abernathy, and love the success that they had. Todd Abernathy is the son of Tom Abernathy, who was on that undefeated team back in 1976. So there's some Indiana lineage and Indiana royalty within that family as far as people associated with IU are concerned. But it's all about timing, isn't it? You know, jobs come open at the right moment for some guys and not for others. And so you wind up getting who you got unless you make your timing. And Indiana's just never been very good at that. Gave Tom Crean an extension instead of hiring Brad Stevens when they could have. Then, you know, fire Tom Crean and hire Archie Miller. I mean, what are you doing?
Yeah, that Jeremy, George, anything you want to add? I only have one more topic to get to, and then I know Kent's got to get rolling. But anything either you want to contribute to this?
Well, I agree with Kent. I mean, the standard is very, very high for Indiana Hoosiers basketball. It always has been, and thanks in great part to Bob Knight. But it's a very interesting comparison, like you said, Kent, with what Michigan faces up against the daunting, Tom Izzo legacy at MSU. And just like you said about Purdue versus Indiana. So I think that's spot on. It's a tough nut to crack, but Indiana obviously has had a much more basketball legacy, Indiana University, than U of M has. But Juwan Howard is facing some of the same issues. I mean, here his own kid won't even stay in the program. His kid is leaving for the NBA draft. And plus he's lost Dickinson and other guys. And it's not a good situation right now at U of M. And conversely, our buddy Izzo, he gets 2 of the seniors to stay, and then he signs these 4 5-star recruits, and he signs good recruits, like you said. So, yeah, it's an interesting situation there, a parallel, like you said, Indiana and U of M.
And he cherry-picked some kids from Indiana, good kids like Gary Harris, Isaiah Booker's coming to Michigan State. He's a terrific big from Cathedral High School here, and just kind of comes in and steals them away from Indiana University and any other school in this state that's recruiting those guys, because Tom Izzo can recruit. Tom Izzo is so good at laying it out for kids. And so we come in second a lot to Tom Izzo.
Yeah. And so did U of M.
Yeah, well, no show would be complete if I couldn't talk about my all-time favorite movies of all time.
Must be Hoosiers.
Yeah, come on. I mean, you know what?
It was too easy of a lead.
Over the years, and you know what? I'm going to say right now, I've watched my fair share of movies, but Hoosiers is the greatest movie I have ever seen. So do you often get asked questions, Kent, about the movie Hoosiers? And, have you been to some of those places where they actually went out there and did some of the filming? What's your perception of Hoosiers and the fact that it's just such an iconic movie? And does it really describe what Indiana basketball is really all about?
It's absolutely spot on perfect. Angelo Pizzo got it exactly right. He was the writer. He still lives in Bloomington. He's a great guy. I moved from North suburban Chicago, where basketball was probably seventh. Like, kids played tennis, they played golf, they played baseball, then they played hockey. Basketball was south of soccer. And then I moved to New Albany, Indiana, which is right across the river from Louisville, and everything's basketball. I mean, it's for high school basketball, and then Louisville, Kentucky, and Indiana, and fell in love with basketball while I was at New Albany. And Hoosiers is the closest thing to a reincarnation of what I experienced in high school. We had a high school team, went 27-1, lost in the state championship game. And like, everybody went. It was that caravan with all the headlights going down the state highway. It was exactly like that. And I got a chance, NBA TV. I had a radio show here for 5 years on the CBS affiliate. And so one of the guys who was in Hoosiers let me know that they were going to do an interview at Hinkle Fieldhouse. They were getting the cast back together. Morris Valanis, who played Jimmy Chitwood, and all these guys, all the living Hickory Huskers, were coming to Hinkle Fieldhouse for this interview with NBA TV. And I said, hey, at the end, can you get the guys to come up into the little ante room here and we can talk?
Right.
And he was like, yeah. So it was like 6 of the Hoosier guys just telling stories back and forth about Gene Hackman and Dennis Hopper and Barbara Hershey and what they experienced while they were doing the movie. It was awesome. It was the most fun I could possibly have for an hour. And absolutely think the world of those guys. They're just like they were in the movie. This is how dumb I am, is that movie was supposedly, I think, in 1952, something like that, 54, right. 52. And so I think of those guys like Jimmy. I think, well, he's got to be pushing almost 90. Well, no, he's an actor. The movie was made in 1987, you dumbass. Right. The guy's, he's in his mid 50s. And they walk in the room. I was like, my God, you guys look fantastic. Yeah, because the movie was set in the 50s. These guys didn't actually go to high school in the 50s. And they couldn't have been more generous with their time and funny with stories. And Gene Hackman, nobody liked. Everybody loved Dennis Hopper. Nobody liked. Gene Hackman was like dour the whole time, kept telling people that their careers were over after this movie was made, that this was the biggest train wreck of a set that he's ever been on. He can't believe that he signed on to do this movie. He was just like in a horrible mood the entire shoot. And but now he says it's a thing that people know him most for, and it's one of the movies that he's most pleased that he actually did.
No kidding. Well, my wife and I had the opportunity to go to the actual, what was it, the Hoosier Gym?
In Knightstown. Yeah,
Knightstown. Yeah, I enjoyed it. That was pretty cool. I shot some baskets for a while, and obviously in the middle of the dead winter. And you know what? Gene Hackman to me is one of my all-time favorite actors. And one of the things I always like about him is when it comes to this basketball team, what I say is a law, absolutely, without discussion. And I can tell you how many times I've echoed those words a few times when I've had to do it. But it has been a lot of fun, to reminisce there. I know everybody all out there say, well, where's Hickory? It doesn't exist. But where do you think that might have probably? I hear Milan. Is it Milan?
Yeah, Milan.
Yeah, where is that? Is that what they think Hickory is, or whatever?
It's kind of halfway between Indy and Cincinnati. But to me, it was very southern Indiana. Like northern Indiana is a little bit different. This was, and they played in the movie. In real life, they played against, I think, Muncie Central. In the movie, I think it was South Bend.
Yeah.
And so it was a north-south. The finals are always north versus south. And so I always thought it was kind of in southern Indiana down by Seymour or Milan or Lagodi, those towns where everything is all about that high school basketball team still to this day.
Yeah, well, George, Jeremy, I mean, it's always the greatest movie of
Yeah,
all.
it's a great classic. It's a great movie. I love Gene Hackman in French Connection, Part 1 and Part 2. Oh, my God, that detective that he was. Oh, my goodness. My God, he was terrific. I saw those movies repeatedly. But anyways, no, Hoosiers is just a fantastic sport.
I wouldn't have an over. I wouldn't have an over under as to tell you how many times I've watched that movie because I can't count that high. It's just been a lot. It really is.
About as many times as I've watched Sound of Music or Wizard of Oz. Those are my two classics, by the way.
All right, let me let everybody know the audio version of Fire Up can be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcast. I'll turn to you in a moment, Jeremy. Please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube, South Florida Tribune. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers. So please subscribe, and then you'll get all these updates. We aim to get the best guest possible. Kent Sterling's the most recent, and he's returned. So please also comment, like, and share the broadcast. Want to be a guest? Send topic ideas to southfloridatribune@gmail.com. And if you want to advertise, call 954-304-4941. We are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Also, your story ideas can also be sent to me at Tribune South. All right, Jeremy, want to make sure we got that in. So go ahead. What do you think about Hoosiers and everything about it, Jeremy?
Well, Hoosiers was a great movie, but I was young when it came out, so I have to refresh myself. I mean, I know it was a great movie. It won awards. It was, Gene Hackman always does a great job. That being said, my favorite sports movie still to this day, I don't care what anybody says, it was The Replacements, because that was funny.
Well, I guess being a football mindset, I could see where you're coming from. But to me, Hoosiers, not it. And as I understand, I believe, Kent, that Gene Hackman lives in New Mexico now, isn't he?
That's what I heard. And I heard he's got a place like next door to Jimmy Johnson down in South Florida.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, like Jimmy Johnson sees Gene fishing every once in a while or something like that.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. What a great show tonight. I mean, we've had an opportunity to talk about the Colts, the Lions, and there's no way we could not bring basketball in here with you, Kent, in any way, shape, or form. So with that said, we want to thank everybody for joining us here on Fire Up. But before we even call it a night, we're going to let everybody know how they get a hold of us. And Kent, make sure you get your information out there as well. I look forward to bringing you back on as often as you want to come on because we all have a blast. So, all right, Jeremy, why don't you put your information out there right away and let everybody know they can get hold of you.
All right. You can find me on the southfloridatribune.com page where you can find me underneath the list of authors for the Motor City Tribune where I write about these guys in the NFL. You can also find me on this sports podcast channel anytime Scott needs me. And you can also find me on my channel, which is Kneecap Biting with Smoking Jeremy B. And on Fridays, you can find me on Sideline Sports on the Gauntlet.
Very good. All right, George, you know what? We want to put yours information before Kent. That way you can go over the book information.
Yep. Detroit Sports Broadcasters on the Air is available. There's a link to it on the South Florida Tribune under my column, which is on the Motor City Tribune page. And I also write for the Detroit Monitor. The book is a great synopsis of sports broadcasting history in Detroit and the state of Michigan. And Scott's in the book too. Scott did a really good interview with Muhammad Ali and another one with Jimmy Connors. And this is a great keepsake. If you're interested in obtaining a copy, you can reach me at gicorn@yahoo.com. You can reach me on LinkedIn under my name and also on Twitter at SandGSports99. And I'm also part of Scott's many, many shows here, including 108 Stitches and Fire Up and Sports Exchange. So glad to be part of the show.
All right, last but not least, Kent Sterling. And no, without the nicknames that you said you never had one, but you left me wide open.
It's Clark Kent Sterling. I like that.
Everything with me is, well, like you said, it's Kent Sterling. You go to YouTube, search Kent Sterling. There it is. Twitter at Kent Sterling, Facebook, Kent Sterling. I do 2 videos a day, and it's really about Indiana sports as much as, well, it's more Indiana sports than anything, but we do Colts and we do Indiana basketball above and beyond everything else. A little bit of Pacers, a little bit of racing, but nothing but fun. And this kind of stuff's fun. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Great to be with you, Scott, George, and Smoking Jeremy B.
Well, you know, Ken, every opportunity I get, I'm going to bring you on because I know we've always had a lot of fun with everything we've done. And tonight was just simply no exception. You, once again, entertained our audience a lot, and we appreciate everything you brought to the table tonight. So one other thing I want to mention real quickly, special kudos to Candy Ebling, who does a marvelous job. You can putting the shows up as well as putting our content up there as well. Check our website out at www.southfloridatribune.com. Candy Ebling did a wonderful job filling in with me last week. In case you didn't know, real quickly, in 4 days, I had an opportunity to cover the Red Wings and the Lightning on Thursday night in Tampa. And that was Thursday. Friday, I had the Miami Hurricanes spring football game. Saturday, it was FAU spring football game. And then, of course, I ended up doing the Miami Marlins, Arizona Diamondbacks 4 in 4 days. But I really enjoy, like Ken always says, he really likes to be out in the field, too, because that's how you're really able to not only make your contacts, but do some of your best work out there for sure. So, meanwhile, once again, everybody, thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Fire Up. And we will catch you the next time. Good night, everybody.